don't be afraid to work for a smaller organisation. I know I work for a really much bigger housing association now, but my experience from working in a smaller one and the ability to sort of uh, get promoted, I'll be honest with you, it gives you those opportunities that you sometimes don't get, and you can stagnate in a bigger one. So if you're at the start of your career and there is a small organization, whether it's a startup or it's simply just a smaller team, it's a great opportunity because you get to learn so much because you have to.
Yeah.
You get to do so much because you have to. Um, but it gives you that time and space just to be able to like grow quite quickly as well, I think.
Welcome to the How I Got Here career series. I'm Sarah Hayford, the founder of the Land Collective, an organisation that supports young people from underrepresented backgrounds to get their first start in real estate and the built environment. Today, I'm speaking to Tanvi Joshi, a strategy manager at one of the largest house builders and landlords in the UK, L&Q. Find out more about her transition from politics into housing, her advice for graduates entering the job market, and the importance of community engagement in the housing sector. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hi Tanvi, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
So you've had quite an interesting career background. So would you be able to just introduce yourself to everyone and how you basically got to where you are today?
No, absolutely. So I'm Tanvi. I have an educational background in international politics and then did a master's in human rights, basically. So everyone sort of thinks that that's it, she's going to work within the charitable field. And that's sort of basically what I did. I proved people right in that sense. So I started off working within a housing association that was for supported living. And the reason and how I went into that job was because I was applying for policy or sort of strategy related roles within the housing sector in particular, and that was because I had a sort of keen interest in homelessness and that sort of thing. So when a housing association that worked primarily with vulnerable adults, an opportunity there came along, it was a sort of a great match for me. The role was within governance. In my previous place, I started off as a governance officer, so I had an immediate sort of learning experience of the regulatory part of property and the regulatory part of housing in particular, and sub regulation of social housing within that. And of course, on the care side, I had to learn that part of regulation too. So it was a really great learning curve for me, because I think without that understanding of the policy and the legislation and the regulation that you have to work within, especially within the property and housing sector, it's very difficult to do your job properly, because it's difficult to understand the impacts that you're supposed to have and that you do actually have on your customers. So my job was very much to look after the regulation of the organisation and guide us through any conversations we may need to have with our regulators. I then progressed through that organisation and became their head of operations, primarily because it was a fairly small housing association. So within the regulatory role, I ended up having about 1,000 hats and learning about the operational side as well. That included everything from business development to the strategy, to business planning, to working with our finance team on our accounts, to actually running the day-to-day operations on the housing and social housing side, but also transactional, working with managing agents. Basically, you name it within housing, I sort of did.
Yeah.
There came a time, as it always does within a career, where you have to think, well, what do I want to do with what I've learned? And that's how I ended up in my current role as a strategy manager at L&Q. This organisation and housing association is part of the G15, so it's sort of one of the top housing associations within England. And that's primarily because of its history inside. It's 65 years old. It's got, at the moment, 250,000 residents approximately, and across about 110,000 properties. So I went from an organisation that had 1,000 plus properties to one that had 100,000. So all of a sudden I was dealing with 100 times sort of, well, I went in thinking I'd be dealing with 100 times that. But actually what I found out was that strategy, whether you work in a small property and housing business or a large one, we say we struggle with the same external factors, the same internal factors. So it turns out housing and property is kind of the same where you go.
Yeah.
So long story short, always been interested within the charitable sector, especially fell into more of the regulation and operational side, which really pushed me into my strategy role, to not be so hands-on and reactive day to day, but actually start thinking of the bigger picture for your organization as well. So that's why I ended up here.
That's really cool. And do you think by you studying kind of international politics at university, that kind of put your sights on kind of housing and property and what was going on there, or did you kind of just find out about it by accident or through mistake sort of thing?
I think I was always very aware and keen about the welfare state, especially within this country, and what we actually offer here is fantastic in a number of ways. And I was really interested in, well, how is that actually delivered? Because I don't come from a social housing background, as in terms of a lived-in experience. So for me, that interest came from, well, how is it delivered? Because I did not have that knowledge from my background at all. The politics degree gave me access to sort of the working infrastructure of how we work as the politics of our country. So how are we governed, and within that, how is our housing system governed, and welfare system in general, and how is that different every time a government changes? So going across sort of the political spectrum from what we know as sort of more right wing to more centre right to centre left to left, how would each of those parties actually deliver on a very theoretical basis? How would they actually choose to deliver welfare?
Yeah.
That got me very interested. And then I started thinking, well, how would I deliver it? So if I was sitting somewhere on that political spectrum, how would I want to deliver it? Obviously, rabbit hole, you end up
Yeah.
researching, and that's the best part of sort of university, is it opens up some of those doors come through books that you read and you think, well, that's interesting, I want to go and research more about that. I ended up doing in year 10, you sort of go away and you do a
Yeah. Work experience.
work experience, don't you? I did a little sort of work experience at Homes England. What it was, the Homes and Communities Agency at the time. I'll be honest, I didn't do any much more than you would expect a 16-year-old to do in an
Yeah.
organisation. They did put me in the post room, but they did also let me have great conversations with people across technology and strategy and the actual policy side as well. So I had great access to those really fantastic people and what they did and how they interacted with government on housing. So that's really where I think it started. I realised it was a real life thing that you deliver,
Yeah.
and it's delivered not only through central government, but these not for profit housing associations. And now, actually, in today's day, for profit housing associations as well, and developers. So that is how actually my politics degree and my even education prior to that pushed me into housing. And then, of course, the ever increasing issue and discussion around homelessness, especially
Yeah.
within our country. And then my last organisation and the actual day-to-day work with vulnerable adults in particular really pushed me into a very specific part of housing, I have to say, because not all social housing deals with vulnerable adults. So but that's where the interest came from.
That's really interesting, just because I think usually when people are at that crunch time when they've just graduated or they're going to graduate, they're trying to connect all the dots to what they've learned and how they're actually going to apply that in real life to find a job. And I think for a lot of people, that's really, really challenging, that process. So it's
Yeah.
really cool that you managed to connect those dots all together and you're still doing something similar, close to what you studied. So I think that's quite cool in that respect.
Yeah. No, I think so. And I think I've been lucky in that sense. And I have to say, I didn't go through university knowing exactly, oh, I want to come out of here and definitely work within this particular type of housing association. But at the same time, it's also about, I think, broadly knowing, well, I want to work within the charitable sector. And within
Yeah.
that, I want to be working within, say, policy, for example. That's how I really started in terms of a job hunt. That's how I started.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get found, don't you? You got your sort of your CV's in the right place at the right time in the right hands. And
Exactly.
that's how I came to be there. But it's just sort of, I think, if you broadly know that I want to work within this particular sector and within that I want to do this thing, I think that's a great start. Get great start in place. I think your colleagues at university and sometimes your lecturers and sometimes even just the theory that you learn, which may seem sort of baseless and not applicable in today's day and age and real life. If you start going down a rabbit hole with it, I think you will sometimes find a place that you find really interesting.
Yeah.
So I think I'd really encourage people to focus on not just what it says in that textbook or what your lecturers are saying to you, but what it actually means. And I think would really encourage people to sit there and think, okay, well, we're talking about I don't know, very broad example, but like neoliberalism.
Yeah.
This is what the theory is, and this is how I write my essay. But what if I applied it today? What would my sort of surroundings look like if I applied that today? And that applying your theoretical and strategy thinking to your operational side, even in the workplace, I think you've got to keep making that connection, and that helps.
Yeah. And do you think part of that also is maybe the values that you have as well? So maybe thinking about what you actually care about within society or day to day to help you kind of make that decision. Do you think that played a part for you as well?
I think it definitely did. I think it definitely did. I was very aware that I came from a sort of a state school background, but very much from a home background where I was comfortable. And by comfortable, I don't mean swimming pools and backyards. I just
Yeah.
mean I was happy and comfortable and I didn't have to worry. But one thing within my family and the values that we have is there is a lot of charitable work that was done.
Yeah.
So I was always sort of aware that the giving back was necessary. And without sounding sort of maternalistic or patronizing in any kind of way, it's just being aware that you don't always have to give back, but you don't have to go and work in a food bank. You don't have to. There are so many ways in which you can actually make an impact
Yeah.
on your surroundings. And for me, that just happened to be, I thought this is where I could best put my skills to the test is, for me, it was housing, because it sounds maybe a bit corny, but I'm a homebody. I love, love, love being at home. Like I
Yeah.
love going out, doing what you need to do during the day and then coming back. And
Yeah.
it's just that nice feeling when you shut your door and you've got that space. And I think if you just wait for a moment when you shut that door and think, how nice is this? It might be raining outside, you've had a tough day, but you're in that
Mm.
secure, safe place. And without putting a damper on it, there's a huge amount of people that don't have that.
Yeah.
Um, whether that be not necessarily even street homelessness, we're talking about sort of sofa surfing. We're also talking about general needs housing where the conditions are poor.
Yeah.
So you could shut the door behind you, but you're not at home, if that makes sense, you know? And it's just that I think that particular reminder and value for me is always, to this day, something that keeps coming back. Um, yeah. You know, when you're enjoying a moment sometimes and it hits you, I'm lucky to have this. And I think it's important to keep that in your mind alongside your aspirations if you're interested in this sector.
Yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
think it definitely keeps you grounded being in the property or
Yeah.
wider built environment. You almost can't shy away from the issues that
Mhm.
are happening because they are literally at your kind of front doorstep essentially in your day-to-day role. Just moving on to the next point, so more about your role specifically. So you work in strategy. I don't think that's
Mhm.
commonly an area that people think of when they think of property, even though it does make sense from a
Yeah.
business perspective. So what does your day-to-day look like in strategy?
So within strategy, we work on two key parts really. One, you've got your literal strategy, which some people know as a corporate strategy. Some people know as, well, it's underpinned by a business plan, but some companies just call it a business plan. It's basically how do you want to deliver your strategic vision over a certain period of time. And as a strategy document, we look at it internally as this is how we're going to allocate our resources and our budget to these various different things across this 5-year period. That's how we look at that. So you've got your strategic vision, which is translated into your 2-year, 3-year, or in my organization's case, 5-year strategy. And this is our endpoint that we want to get to, or broadly, this is what we want to achieve. And then below that, we've got the business plans, which really break down almost step by step across each quarter how we're going to deliver what we're saying we would within our strategy, and keeping it grounded and having to meet that strategic vision. So it's always a link back. It's like in school, they tell you always look back at the question to make sure you've answered it.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Always look back at the strategic vision to make sure that's what we're getting to do. So I work with our board and our exec and also wider colleagues across the business to actually develop that strategy. So that what is the story we want to write, and what is what we want to do over the next few years. That includes a lot of working with our research team who understand the external environment and the potential impacts of that on a housing association like L&Q. A lot, and this is across both your actual delivery of housing, but also developments and the build side as well, especially because the pressures on that right now are huge. It's working with all those different departments to understand, well, where do you actually want to be? Where can you realistically be? this is how much you have in your purse to actually be able to do that.
Mm.
And then going away and writing that story with the board and the exec, and then getting that delivered. Really interestingly, the last couple of years have been quite a shift where there's a huge amount of resident involvement now. So within the built environment, especially, we're really trying to build in residents' meaningful conversation. So there are conferences, which is one coming up this summer, where residents are involved and actually invited, an open invite, come, anyone who's interested can come, and we'll speak about our future visions, and we'll say, well, this is what we're thinking of doing in our next strategy. And I usually ask questions like, well, what does this mean to you? Do you like how it's worded? How do you interpret it? But also, what does good look like to you? So as part of my role, we also ask those sort of questions, and we engage with our actual customers, our actual residents, which makes it a lot more meaningful. Because I think within the build environment, it's very easy to get caught up in our bricks and mortar and day to day. And we forget that someone's going to move into that home, or someone's actually going to use this service, and it has a human impact. The second part of my role is working on our operating model. So in order to deliver your strategy, like I said, we've got those resources and budgets within which we have to do that. To support that, especially when you're working in a sort of bigger organization, you have to have a operating model that supports the success of that. So you need to have the right levers and structures in place to be able to do so. So what I do is me and my colleague, we assess our current operating model, because we've designed what we think is a target operating model to actually be able to successfully deliver that. And then we work with different parts of the business to change how they work, whether that be structural, whether that be number of people in your team, or simply the reallocation of people so they're actually doing the right jobs to fulfill what they're supposed to do. So that's a really interesting part of it, because that has a very direct impact on how we run the business day to day, which then has a really direct impact on the service achieved by the customers. At the moment, the strategy is underpinned by wanting to achieve operational excellence, and it is what it says on the tin. This particular organisation for years and years has been sort of grown because of the need in housing, but also because of the pressures on it in terms of merging and acquiring smaller, maybe sometimes failing housing associations. And I like to put it that because of that, it's ended up with a strategy and framework that's like a patchwork duvet. It's nice, you can sleep under it, but sometimes it doesn't look very good, and it will fall apart eventually. And that's where we are now. So the idea is to strip all that back, simplify, and really just have a operating model that is really clean, with clear accountabilities and a very clear strategy that says we will deliver 2 core services, good asset management and buildings, but also really core housing management and tenancy management services. That's what we are as a social housing provider, and that is what we will do, and we will do it well. So let's not overcomplicate our story, that sort of thing. So yeah, two sides of the job: delivering and designing current and future strategy, and also creating an operating model that facilitates that.
That sounds brilliant, and also very stressful, might I add, at times, especially given everything that's going on macroeconomic factors and things like that. It does sound like it can be really challenging, but also very rewarding, especially when you mention that resident involvement, because I think quite often in real estate, or even if you are a person who isn't really involved with our sector, it very much feels like us and them, especially in social housing. So it's really good that you're trying to kind of fill that gap with something meaningful and allow residents the time and space to actually give their opinions on what's going on as well.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially within our sector, because whether it be social housing, sort of you're selling freehold, or you're building properties, like I live in a sort of built to rent apartment block, even if you're building that, our customers are so real, and what we build and what we give them actually has not just a 10-minute reaction on them. It affects them for a long period of time. So we're not in a sector where we're selling chocolate bars, and some people might not like it. Doesn't matter, it's going to affect them for a 5-minute bite.
Yeah.
This is a very long-term, deep impact that affects their future, their aspirations, and their actual ability to have that social mobility in some cases as well. Because
Yeah.
some people use social housing as a springboard to actually even get onto the housing ladder.
Yeah.
So it's so important that we deliver those services. I really try and push this at work quite a lot, coming from my operational background. And this is why I would really encourage anybody to who even is interested in working in strategy to have a moment and also work within operations, because nothing brings to light the impact of what you do like working on the operational side.
Yeah.
Because then when you do move on to work in strategy, it really helps you to always constantly think back to, okay, I'd really like for us to do this, but how would this affect customers? I know how it would affect it because I've seen it with my own eyes. So I'd always encourage somebody to always like to have both sides of the coin. If you can get that experience, jump for it.
Yeah. And what would you say is maybe your most favorite part of your job at the moment?
What's interesting? I think it's a very centralized role, which is great. So you're like, sometimes we work just in isolation. We're like, right, we've got everything we need. Let's go away, which is great, you know. But at the same time, a great part of the job is that it gives you access to so many people across the organization. And they are all from different backgrounds: finance, policy, resident involvement, actual housing delivery, developments, you name it. It gives you access to all of these people. And what I love about it is you ask one question and you get like 10 different perspectives. And for me, I love that part of it, because then you get to go back and design something that hopefully meets all of their 10 perspectives.
Yeah.
So I think that for me is the best part, is really working with such a broad range of people. So it's nice to be quite central.
And now the opposite. So your least favorite or maybe most challenging part of your job.
It's funny, if I was still in my old role, in that head of operations role, I would have said something completely different. But in this particular role, it's the flip of what I just said is the positive. It's those people again, because then you do actually have those 10 people sitting in front of you. And I'll be very honest, some of them have been in the sector for 20, 30 years. Some of them have been in the sector and sometimes in that same organization for as long as I have been alive,
Yeah.
to put it bluntly. So it can sometimes be quite daunting to walk into a room with experience that is just so much experience in the room. And
Yeah.
you're going in and you're saying, well, I think we should do it like this. So I think it's not the worst part of the job, because we work with a great team and they're always quite supportive. But within housing in general, both within my current role and previous, I've definitely been in rooms where I've suggested something, and for a moment, I've had that imposter syndrome moment where I think, I'm not qualified to tell you this because you've been around longer. So, and that moment can be very quite negative if you let it be.
Yeah.
But I always sort of flipped it as, well, they wouldn't let me in the room. You know, you wouldn't be invited into the room if people didn't value your opinion. So it's
Yeah.
always just keeping in mind that you're there for a reason and people do trust you. But when that moment of like, worry comes along, I'm too young to be here. Um, that can be a bit of a negative for it, because there are people out there that are brilliant and they've been around forever doing it and they are genuinely good at what they do. So
Yeah.
respect them, but don't be worried to tell them they're wrong if they are.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually going to be my next question, actually, just on that point. How do you navigate being like a graduate or really early in your career and walking into these meetings with people who are clearly experienced? Because it can be so daunting. So that,
Yeah,
yeah, your question about how you dealt with that over time. And I guess it is more of just a practice thing, like it comes with time. You're not really going to be perfect from the very
yeah.
beginning, but at least you're solidifying your space at work by being vocal and
Mhm.
announcing your opinions in the right way or your ideas in the right way, right?
No, absolutely. And I think my previous role really gave me a gateway to that, because it was very soon after that I joined, where all of a sudden I was in front of like a board I'd never met before, and everyone knew everyone. And again, a huge amount of experience in the room. And it is daunting to go in there and someone says, oh, well, Tanvi, what do you think of this? And you think, you're actually asking me, is my opinion,
Yeah.
can I give it? You know, it's that moment of like, can I? So I'd be lying if I said I wasn't like initially unsure and nervous. But over time, I'll be honest, I became quite brazen. And that's not saying you walk into a room and you're sort of like, listen to me or anything like that. No, but just say it. Worst thing, there's always going to be someone in the room, I think, that is not going to like what you say or might have a slightly different. But if you're in a room that is full of respectful people, each opinion is valued, and doesn't matter who you are, your background, how long you've been around, they will. What you've said will form part of the conversation, and it will influence what is going on. Because again, you're in that room for a reason. And as soon as I realised that, I just went for it.
Yeah.
And I think when you I just went for it, and I was like, you know what? I'm here. I'm here for a reason. You clearly don't have a problem with me, otherwise I wouldn't be here tomorrow. So just say it. As long as you're confident what you're saying isn't baseless, you got to be
Yeah.
sure to not say silly things that you can't
Yeah.
back up. You know.
Yeah.
So say it, and say it with confidence.
I think that's really good advice. And what do you think are some of the key skills like a young person just entering the sector would need to thrive, either in strategy or in the wider industry?
I think in general, I think this would probably apply to the wider industry as well. Keep on top of regulation and legislative changes, especially at the moment. So if you're entering the sector now, whether that be the social housing sector, the wider housing and build sector, regardless, keep an eye open and always research. And that's something that I haven't stopped, is sign up to those housing publications, or just research. Even if you see an article on BBC to do with property and housing, click on it, because
Yeah.
it will matter, and it changes what you do immediately. I mean, we've had social housing regulation come out where, well, it's through consultation, so you know it's going to come out, and you have to use those 2 years before it does to start making changes now. And if you don't keep your eyes open and you're not part of reading about it, you will miss out on really key things. And sometimes it has very serious consequences for you and where you work. So just keep learning about it. Plus, it's quite fun if you're
Yeah.
like that, if you're that way inclined. So yeah, really corny, I know, but learn. Just keep learning, especially in housing. And like I said, because our needs are changing in this country for what housing means.
Yeah.
Our definition of what social housing, for example, is changing, and who uses it, and the user base is changing. So the kind of houses we choose to build and need to build is changing. The sort of the impact of, or rather what is a community, even as a conversation I had with residents only last year, is the importance of a community and regeneration projects around it. Even that is changing. So housing is not what it used to be. So whoever is entering into the sector now really needs to be like on it with learning.
Yeah. And do you have any kind of last minute words of wisdom for young people watching who, just general career advice or something tailored and specific to maybe L&Q or what you've done in the past?
Yeah. I think I'd say two things. One, don't be afraid of entering into a charitable space or a charitable arm of a for-profit. If you're within working for, say, a developer in the built environment, don't be afraid to look at the social impact side, for example, because there's a huge amount of really great, interesting work that gets done within a not-for-profit or charitable area, which is really exciting and really nuanced as well. It's not because you still have to generate money. So if you are business minded and you like finance and you want to make money, your business still has to make that cash in order to reinvest into your charitable side. So you're not going to miss out on that sort of fun of like making deals or business. You're not.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to look that way. There's a great number of roles within the charitable, not-for-profit sector that are really fun and exciting. And also don't be afraid to work for a smaller organization. I know I work for a really much bigger housing association now, but my experience from working in a smaller one and the ability to sort of uh, get promoted, I'll be honest with you, it gives you those opportunities that you sometimes don't get, and you can stagnate in a bigger one. So if you're at the start of your career and there is a small organization, whether it's a startup or it's simply just a smaller team, it's a great opportunity because you get to learn so much because you have to.
Yeah.
You get to do so much because you have to. Um, but it gives you that time and space just to be able to like grow quite quickly as well, I think. Plus it's usually quite exciting and quite fun. That small team makes it fun, you know. So it's
Yeah.
a great way to sort of start. So don't be afraid to go into not-for-profit charitable, and do not be afraid. In fact, I encourage it to work within a smaller organization to begin with.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm a big advocate for starting in a small place just because you get to wear all of the hats. You get to do a lot more
Yeah.
things, and it's like sort of like sink or swim sort of vibes, which I guess is not for everybody, but it very much feels like that, and it's a really like character building experience, especially at the beginning of your career. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm also a big advocate for that. I learned a hell of a lot being in a smaller company before I went to a larger one,
Yeah.
and seeing how things go and just being a bit nosy and learning a little
Yeah,
bit of
exactly.
everything has really helped for sure.
I'll just add one more if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
That would be to like take care of yourself, because working in a small organization and wearing those hats is really fun, and you can put your like 110% into it, because it very quickly becomes like a personal thing. I want this to do better. And that can be all encompassing. And I think I learnt that like 2-3 years into that experience. So, oh my gosh, I'm not doing anything for myself. So don't forget your human self,
Yeah,
please. um, Whether it be go for a walk at the end of the day, or just say, you know what, it's 5:30. I know you need me to finish something today, but I'll do it. But I'm going to go for a walk now. Do that.
yeah,
Just don't forget you're a person.
yeah. I feel like I need to take that advice on board myself, actually.
It's always the people that give it that aren't,
Yeah.
aren't taking it.
And lastly, Tanvi, so if anyone has any questions about just your career journey or where you're at, where can they find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. My name is Tanvi Joshi. If you search Tanvi Joshi L&Q, I'll come up. Otherwise, just put Tanvi Joshi L&Q into Google. There's not many of us, so you'll find me pretty quickly. Otherwise, yeah, I'm more than happy to share my email address if you wanted to, Sarah. That's absolutely fine. I'm happy for anybody to get in touch with any questions anytime.
Amazing. But thank you so much, Tanvi, for chatting with me, and all the best on your career journey.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Sarah.